6 months later, Sarah sat in the federal courthouse watching as Judge Patricia Morrison read the sentences for Marcus and James Webb. The courtroom was packed with victims of their fraud scheme, FBI agents and news reporters covering what had become known as the HOA fraud case. Marcus Webb stood first to hear his sentence. He had cooperated fully with the investigation and helped the FBI recover millions of dollars in stolen assets. But Judge Morrison was not impressed by his cooperation. "Mr. Webb," the judge said sternly, "you systematically targeted vulnerable families and stole their homes through fraud and intimidation. You showed no mercy to elderly people living on fixed incomes or single mothers struggling to make ends meet. While your cooperation has been noted, the severity of your crimes demands significant punishment. Marcus Webb, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims of your crimes." Marcus collapsed into his chair as the reality of his sentence hit him. 12 years meant he would not be released until he was almost 60 years old. His wife Linda, who had been granted immunity in exchange for testifying against her husband and brother-in-law, began crying in the gallery. James Webb's sentencing was even harsher. Because he had refused to cooperate and had been the mastermind behind the operation, Judge Morrison showed him no leniency. "James Webb, you are the primary architect of this criminal enterprise. You designed a system specifically intended to prey upon the most vulnerable members of our community. Your crimes have caused immeasurable financial and emotional damage to dozens of families. You are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims." James Webb showed no emotion as he heard his sentence. He had maintained his innocence throughout the trial, despite overwhelming evidence against him. Sarah felt satisfied watching him led away in handcuffs, knowing he would not be able to hurt any more families for a very long time. Mrs. Henderson and the other HOA accomplices received sentences ranging from 3 to 8 years, depending on their level of involvement. Even the 2 fake officers who had tried to arrest Sarah were sentenced to 5 years each for impersonating federal agents. After the sentencing, Sarah spoke with several of the victims who had attended the hearing. The Johnsons had received a check for $78,000 from the Asset Recovery Fund, which allowed them to move back into a house similar to the one they had lost. "Agent Martinez," Mrs. Johnson said, hugging Sarah outside the courthouse, "I can never thank you enough for what you did for us. If you hadn't fought back, that horrible man would still be stealing people's homes." Roberto and Maria Garcia had also recovered most of their losses and were able to keep their house. "We were so close to selling to that criminal," Roberto told Sarah. "If you hadn't exposed him when you did, we would have lost our home too." Sarah felt proud knowing that her investigation had not only punished the criminals, but had also prevented them from victimizing more families. The FBI estimated that the Webb brothers had been planning to expand their operation to at least 5 more cities before they were caught. Agent Rodriguez joined Sarah as they walked out of the courthouse. "So what's next for you? Back to undercover work chasing drug dealers and money launderers?" "Actually, I've been thinking about specializing in fraud cases like this one," Sarah said. "Director Williams offered me a position leading a new task force focused on real estate and HOA fraud. Apparently our case has inspired similar investigations in 12 other states. That's great news. You've definitely found your calling with this type of work." Sarah had indeed discovered that she enjoyed fraud investigation even more than her previous undercover work. Fraud cases required the same investigative skills and attention to detail, but they were less physically dangerous and had more clearly defined victims who could be helped by successful prosecutions. The national media attention from the case had brought unexpected benefits. Sarah's CNN interview had generated hundreds of tips from people who suspected they were victims of similar fraud schemes. The FBI was now investigating cases in Texas, Florida, California, and 8 other states based on information from people who had seen Sarah's story. Congress had also taken notice of the case. Representatives from both parties had introduced legislation to strengthen federal oversight of HOA enforcement and make it easier for homeowners to fight fraudulent violations. Sarah had been invited to testify before a House committee about needed reforms, but the most satisfying outcome for Sarah was what happened in her own neighborhood. The legitimate HOA board had been reformed with new leadership and new rules requiring transparency in all enforcement actions. Property values had actually increased after the fraud scheme was exposed and eliminated. Sarah still lived in her house on Maple Street. Though she had made some security improvements after becoming a public figure, she had installed better cameras and lighting, and she now kept her FBI credentials and weapon more easily accessible. Her neighbors had a very different attitude toward her after learning about her real job and what she had done to protect their community. Mr. Garcia had given her a new garden gnome to replace the one she had been forced to remove during the HOA harassment. This gnome was dressed like a superhero and carried a tiny FBI badge. For our neighborhood protector, he had said when he presented it to her. Sarah kept the superhero gnome on her front porch as a reminder of how much her life had changed. She no longer needed to hide her identity from her neighbors, and she had found work that felt more meaningful than anything she had done before. On quiet evenings, Sarah would sit on her porch and look at her peaceful street. Kids still rode their bikes on the sidewalk. Mr. Johnson still washed his car every weekend. Everything looked the same as when she had first moved there, seeking anonymity and peace. But Sarah was no longer the same person who had bought this house hoping to escape from her work. She had learned that sometimes the most important cases found you when you least expected them. Her desire for a quiet life had led her to uncover one of the largest fraud schemes in FBI history. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Agent Park calling with news about a potential new case. Sarah, we just received a complaint from a woman in Denver whose HOA is demanding she pay $15,000 to repaint her house. The details sound very similar to what the Webb brothers were doing. Can you fly out there next week to investigate? Sarah smiled as she looked at her superhero garden gnome. Absolutely. Send me the details and I'll start reviewing the case tonight. As she hung up the phone, Sarah realized she was excited about the new investigation. She had found her true calling in protecting families from criminals who preyed on homeowners. The quiet FBI agent who had once wanted to hide from the world had become a nationally recognized expert in real estate fraud. The Webb brothers had tried to force her out of her home and had ended up giving her the most rewarding career of her life. Sometimes the best revenge was not just justice, but finding your true purpose in the process of fighting back. Sarah went inside to prepare for her next case, ready to hunt down another group of criminals who thought they could steal people's homes without consequences. They were about to learn the same lesson the Webb brothers had learned. Never underestimate a determined FBI agent who is fighting to protect her community. At 6 o'clock Sunday morning, FBI agents surrounded James Webb's house in an upscale neighborhood across town. Sarah watched from an unmarked car as Agent Rodriguez led the arrest team to the front door. James Webb was still in his pajamas when they took him into custody. Unlike his brother Marcus, James immediately demanded a lawyer and refused to say anything. But his silence did not matter because Sarah's team had already gathered enough evidence to convict him without his cooperation. The search of James's house revealed computer files with detailed records of the fraud operation. There were spreadsheets listing target families, financial projections for each neighborhood, and communications with criminal associates in other cities. James had been keeping meticulous records of his crimes, which made Sarah's job much easier. Agent Park reviewed the financial records they found. James Webb has been very busy, she reported to Sarah. We found bank accounts in 5 different states, shell companies in Delaware and Nevada, and property records showing they've been running this scam in 7 cities, not just 4 like Marcus told us. How much money are we talking about? Sarah asked. At least $8 million in stolen equity from homeowners over the past 5 years. Maybe more once we finish going through all the records. Sarah felt sick thinking about how many families had been robbed by the Webb brothers, but she also felt determined to make sure every victim got their money back. Over the next 3 days, FBI teams executed search warrants on 12 different locations connected to the Webb brothers' operation. They arrested Mrs. Henderson, who had been creating fake violation reports in exchange for $500 per month. They also arrested 2 other HOA board members who had been helping with the scheme. The investigation revealed that the Webb brothers had perfected their system over 5 years of operation. They would research neighborhoods with active HOA boards, then either bribe existing board members or get their own people elected to the boards. Once they controlled the HOA enforcement, they would systematically target homeowners they thought would be easy to intimidate. Their target selection was coldly calculated. They preferred elderly homeowners, single mothers, recent immigrants, and anyone who seemed to have financial difficulties. They avoided targeting people who might have the resources to fight back legally, such as lawyers, police officers, or anyone connected to law enforcement. The irony was not lost on Sarah that they had specifically tried to avoid targeting law enforcement, only to accidentally choose one of the FBI's most experienced fraud investigators as their victim. Agent Rodriguez brought Sarah updates throughout the week as they traced the full extent of the criminal network. "We found their operation in Phoenix," he reported on Wednesday. "They were targeting a retirement community there. Lots of elderly homeowners on fixed incomes who couldn't afford to fight the fake violations." "How many victims in Phoenix?" Sarah asked. 18 families so far. Same pattern. Escalating HOA violations, mounting fines. Then James's associate would show up offering to buy their houses for cash at below-market prices. Sarah's anger grew with each new discovery. The Webb brothers had been systematically destroying people's lives for years, and they had gotten away with it because their victims did not realize they were dealing with an organized criminal enterprise. On Thursday, Sarah received a call from Agent Director Williams. "Excellent work on this case, Agent Martinez. The Attorney General's office is very impressed with what you've uncovered. They want to make this a priority prosecution." "Thank you, sir. When do you think we'll be ready to file formal charges?" "Next week. We want to charge them with everything we can prove: fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, racketeering, and civil rights violations. If convicted on all charges, both brothers could face 40 years in federal prison." Sarah smiled. 40 years seemed like appropriate punishment for stealing the homes and life savings of dozens of innocent families. The investigation also revealed how the Webb brothers had been able to operate for so long without being caught. They had been careful to spread their crimes across multiple jurisdictions, making it difficult for local law enforcement to see the full pattern. They had also been smart about keeping their individual violations small enough that most victims could not afford to hire lawyers to fight back, but their biggest advantage had been that most people trusted HOA violations were legitimate. Homeowners who received violation notices assumed they had actually done something wrong, even when the violations were completely fabricated. Sarah realized that this case would help law enforcement agencies across the country recognize similar fraud schemes in the future. She began working with the FBI's training division to create educational materials that could be shared with local police departments. On Friday evening, Sarah received a phone call that made her week even better. It was Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman whose story had first made Sarah understand the human cost of the Webb brothers' crimes. "Agent Martinez, I saw the news about the arrests," Mrs. Johnson said. "I can't believe those men are finally going to be punished for what they did to us." "Mrs. Johnson, I have good news for you. Our financial recovery team believes we can get back most of the money you lost when you sold your house. It may take some time, but you should be able to recover at least $60,000. Mrs. Johnson started crying with relief. "Thank you so much. My husband and I have been so worried about our finances since we lost our house. This news is like a miracle." Similar calls came in from other victims throughout the week. Sarah felt proud that her work was not just punishing criminals, but also helping innocent people recover from the damage that had been done to them. Agent Park provided the final financial analysis on Friday afternoon. "We've traced assets worth $12 million that belong to the Webb brothers and their associates. After we pay for the investigation and legal costs, we should be able to return about $7 million to the victims." "That won't cover all their losses," Sarah noted. "No, but it will help. And we're also working with insurance companies and mortgage lenders to help victims who are still dealing with financial problems from the fraud." As Sarah prepared to go home Friday evening, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She had started the month thinking she was dealing with an annoying HOA dispute. Now she was leading one of the largest real estate fraud investigations in FBI history. Agent Rodriguez stopped by her desk before leaving. "Sarah, there's something else you should know. The story about your investigation is starting to get national media attention. CNN wants to interview you about the case," Sarah groaned. She hated media attention and preferred to work quietly behind the scenes. But she knew that publicity about this case might help other victims of similar fraud schemes come forward. "Set up the interview," she said. "If telling this story helps other people avoid being victimized, then it's worth dealing with the media." As Sarah drove home to her house on Maple Street, she thought about how satisfying it was to know that the Webb brothers would soon be in federal prison. They had tried to steal her home and had ended up destroying their own lives instead. The quiet neighborhood that Sarah had chosen for its peace and anonymity had become the place where she made one of the most important cases of her career. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected places. Within 2 hours of the fake arrest attempt, Sarah's front yard was filled with FBI agents, local police officers, and forensic specialists. Her quiet Saturday morning had turned into the center of a major federal investigation. Agent Rodriguez set up a command post in Sarah's living room, while other agents began processing the crime scene. The two fake officers, whose real names were Tony Chen and Mike Rodriguez, were taken to the hospital for medical clearance before being booked into jail. Marcus Webb was transported directly to the federal building for questioning. "So how long have you known about this fraud operation?" Rodriguez asked Sarah as they reviewed her evidence files. "I started suspecting something about 6 weeks ago, when the HOA violations became obviously fake," Sarah said. "But I only confirmed it was a coordinated scheme about 2 weeks ago, when I traced the connections between Marcus Webb, his brother James, and Pinnacle Properties." Rodriguez whistled as he looked through Sarah's research. "This is incredibly thorough work. You've basically built the entire case already. Financial records, property transfers, victim statements, email communications, everything we need to prosecute." "I had plenty of time to investigate since I was supposed to be on a break from active cases," Sarah said with a smile. "Plus, they made it personal by targeting me directly." Agent Lisa Park, a specialist in financial crimes, joined their conversation. "Sarah, this fraud scheme is bigger than just your neighborhood. I ran the Pinnacle Properties information through our databases and we found similar operations in 3 other cities. The Webb brothers have been running this scam for at least 5 years. Sarah felt both excited and angry hearing this news. Excited because they had uncovered a major criminal enterprise that had probably stolen millions of dollars from innocent families. Angry because it meant many more people had been victimized than she had initially realized. "How many victims are we talking about?" Sarah asked. "So far, we've identified 43 families who sold their homes to Pinnacle Properties or related companies at below-market prices after being harassed by HOA violations," Agent Park said. "The total financial damage could be over $4 million. Rodriguez shook his head. "These guys were really organized. They set up fake HOA enforcement in multiple neighborhoods, targeted vulnerable homeowners, and then flipped the properties for huge profits. It's one of the most sophisticated real estate fraud schemes I've ever seen." Sarah's phone rang. It was her supervisor, Agent Director Williams, calling from FBI headquarters in Washington. "Agent Martinez, I hear you've been busy during your vacation time," Director Williams said with amusement in his voice. "Yes, sir. I seem to have stumbled into a major fraud investigation while trying to enjoy some quiet time at home." "Well, your quiet time is officially over. I'm authorizing a full federal task force to investigate this Webb family operation. I want you to lead the investigation since you know the case better than anyone." Sarah smiled. This was exactly what she had been hoping to hear. "Thank you, sir. What resources can I have?" "Whatever you need. Financial crime specialists, computer forensics, surveillance teams, and full cooperation from local law enforcement. I want this entire criminal network shut down, and all the stolen money recovered for the victims." After the call ended, Sarah felt the familiar rush of excitement that came with starting a major case. But this time it was personal too. The Webb brothers had tried to steal her home and had succeeded in stealing the homes of dozens of other families. She was going to make sure they paid for every crime they had committed. Agent Rodriguez interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, we just got some interesting information from Marcus Webb's interrogation. He's trying to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "He's claiming that the whole operation was his brother James's idea and that he was just following orders. He says he can give us information about other fraud schemes if we reduce his charges." Sarah laughed. "That's exactly what I expected him to do. Criminals always try to blame their partners when they get caught." "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet. We wanted to talk to you first since you know the case best." Sarah thought about it for a moment. "Let's see what information he has, but make it clear that any deal depends on him telling us everything and helping us recover all the stolen money for the victims. And I want to be in the room when we question him." An hour later, Sarah sat across from Marcus Webb in an FBI interrogation room. Marcus looked tired and scared. very different from the arrogant man who had tried to have her arrested a few hours earlier. "Mr. Webb," Sarah began, "you're facing federal charges that could put you in prison for 20 years. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, money laundering, and impersonating federal officers. Your only chance of getting a reduced sentence is to cooperate fully with our investigation." Marcus fidgeted in his chair. "I want to cooperate. This whole thing got out of hand. It wasn't supposed to hurt so many people. Whose idea was it to start targeting homeowners with fake HOA violations? It was James's idea originally. He said we could make easy money by getting people to sell their houses cheap. But I came up with the HOA enforcement angle." "So you admit you created fake violations to pressure people into selling?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but we never physically hurt anyone. We just used paperwork and threats." "You stole people's homes," Sarah said firmly. "You targeted elderly people and families who couldn't afford to fight back. You destroyed their lives for your own profit." "I know it was wrong," Marcus said quietly. "I want to make it right. I can give you all the records, all the bank accounts, everything. I just want this to be over." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "We need to know about your operations in other cities. How many neighborhoods have you been targeting?" 4 cities total. We have people working for us in Tampa, Atlanta, and Phoenix. James has been expanding the operation for 3 years. Sarah felt satisfied that they were getting the full scope of the criminal enterprise. "We're going to need names, addresses, financial records, and contact information for everyone involved in this scheme." "I can get you everything," Marcus said desperately. "Just please don't give me the maximum sentence. I have a family." "You should have thought about your family before you decided to become a criminal," Sarah replied. "Your cooperation will be noted, but you're still going to prison for what you've done." Marcus started crying, finally understanding that his life as he knew it was over. Sarah felt no sympathy for him. He had shown no mercy to the families he had victimized, and she would show none to him. After the interrogation, Sarah and Rodriguez reviewed what they had learned. The Webb brothers' fraud operation was even larger than they had initially thought. With Marcus's cooperation, they would be able to shut down the entire network and potentially recover millions of dollars for the victims. "What's our next move?" Rodriguez asked. "We arrest James Webb tonight before he realizes his brother has been caught," Sarah said. "Then we start dismantling their entire operation piece by piece. I want every person involved in this scheme in federal custody within a week." "And Mrs. Henderson?" Sarah smiled grimly. "She was Marcus's partner in creating fake violations. She's going to prison too." As Sarah drove home that evening, she felt proud of what she had accomplished. She had not only protected her own home, but had also uncovered a major criminal enterprise that would have continued victimizing innocent families if she had not stopped it. The fake arrest. That was supposed to be the end of. Sarah's resistance had instead become the beginning of the Webb brothers' complete destruction. They had tried to intimidate the wrong person, and now they would spend years in federal prison thinking about their mistake. Marcus Webb did not call Sarah back. Instead, the harassment got much worse. Over the next 3 days, Sarah received 5 more violation notices. They claimed she was operating a car repair business in her garage, keeping chickens in her backyard, painting her house without permission, installing unauthorized satellite equipment, and disturbing the peace with construction noise. None of these things were true. Sarah did not even own any tools beyond a basic screwdriver set. But each violation came with a fine of $1,500. The letters became more threatening, saying that legal action was imminent and that she would be forcibly removed if she did not comply immediately. Sarah documented everything and added it to her growing file of evidence. She also set up a small camera system around her house to record any suspicious activity. If Marcus Webb wanted to escalate this situation, she would be ready. On Saturday morning, Sarah was drinking coffee and reviewing case files when she heard a car pull into her driveway. She looked out the window and saw a white sedan with 2 men getting out. Both men wore dark blue uniforms that looked similar to police uniforms, complete with badges, utility belts, and what appeared to be handcuffs. Behind them, Marcus Webb got out of a separate car. He was wearing a suit and carrying a folder of papers. Sarah immediately knew this was going to be their final attempt to force her out of her house. Sarah quickly hid her FBI credentials and weapon in a kitchen drawer where she could reach them easily. Then she activated the recording app on her phone and put it in her shirt pocket. Whatever was about to happen, she wanted to capture every word. The doorbell rang and Sarah opened the door. The two uniformed men stood on either side of Marcus Webb, trying to look official and intimidating. "Sarah Martinez," one of the uniformed men said in a stern voice. "Yes, that's me. I'm Officer Williams and this is Officer Johnson from HOA Enforcement Services. We have a warrant for your arrest due to multiple violations of community housing standards." Sarah had to keep herself from laughing. There was no such thing as HOA Enforcement Services, and HOA violations were civil matters, not criminal ones. These men were clearly not real police officers, but she decided to play along and see how far they would take their fake arrest. "A warrant? For what exactly?" Marcus Webb stepped forward with his folder. "Ms. Martinez, you have accumulated over $12,000 in unpaid HOA fines. You have refused to comply with community standards and have ignored multiple notices to correct violations. Under Section 47 of the Community Charter, we have the authority to arrest homeowners who repeatedly break HOA rules." "That doesn't sound right," Sarah said, still pretending to be confused and scared. "I've never heard of anyone being arrested for HOA violations." "Well, now you have," Marcus said with a satisfied smile. "Officers, please place Ms. Martinez under arrest." The fake Officer Williams stepped forward and pulled out handcuffs. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. You're being taken to community court where a judge will decide whether you can keep your house or if it needs to be sold to pay your fines." Community court was another made-up term. Sarah realized their plan was probably to take her somewhere isolated and scare her into signing papers to sell her house to Pinnacle Properties. "Wait," Sarah said, backing into her house slightly. "This seems extreme. Isn't there some other way to handle this?" Marcus Webb's smile got bigger. "Well, there might be one option. If you agree right now to sell your house to settle your debts, we could cancel the arrest warrant. I happen to know someone who buys houses in situations like this." "You mean your brother James?" Sarah asked sweetly. Marcus's smile disappeared. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. James Webb from Pinnacle Properties. Your brother who makes lowball offers to people you've been harassing with fake HOA violations." The two fake officers looked confused and began to glance nervously at each other. They clearly had not expected Sarah to know about the connection between Marcus and James. "I think you're confused," Marcus said, but his voice was less confident now. "Officer Williams, please arrest this woman immediately." The fake Officer Williams reached out to grab Sarah's arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us right now." This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. She stepped back and smiled. "I don't think so." Before any of the three men could react, Sarah moved with the speed and precision that had made her one of the FBI's most effective agents. She grabbed the fake officer's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the ground hard and stayed there. The second fake officer tried to run, but Sarah caught him before he made it 3 steps. She used a move she had learned in FBI training to flip him over her shoulder. He landed on his back next to his partner, gasping for breath. Marcus Webb stood frozen in shock, staring at the two men on the ground. "What? How did you—" Sarah dusted off her hands and smiled at Marcus. "FBI training. Very useful for dealing with criminals who try to intimidate federal agents." "FBI?" Marcus's voice cracked. "You're not FBI, you work in marketing." Sarah walked into her house and came back with her credentials and her service weapon. She held up the badge so Marcus could see it clearly. "Special Agent Sarah Martinez, Federal Bureau of Investigation, badge number 2847. And you, Marcus Webb, are under arrest for fraud, extortion, conspiracy, and impersonating law enforcement officers." Marcus tried to run, but Sarah was much faster. She tackled him before he reached his car and put him in handcuffs. Real ones, not the fake ones his pretend officers had been carrying. Sarah pulled out her phone and called FBI headquarters. "This is Agent Martinez. I need an immediate federal response team and local police backup at my location. I have 3 suspects in custody for an ongoing fraud investigation." While they waited for backup to arrive, Sarah read Marcus and his 2 accomplices their rights. She also called for an ambulance to check on the fake officers, who were both conscious but bruised from their encounter with the ground. "You can't arrest me," Marcus said from the back of Sarah's car where she had placed him. "I'm the HOA president. I was just enforcing community rules." "You are running a criminal enterprise," Sarah replied. "You and your brother have been stealing people's homes through fraud and intimidation. I have evidence of every crime you've committed over the past 3 years. This is crazy. You attacked those officers. Sarah laughed. Those weren't officers. HOA enforcement officers don't exist, and even if they did, they wouldn't have authority to arrest anyone for civil violations. You hired 2 guys to dress up like cops and help you intimidate me into selling my house cheap to your brother's company. Marcus was quiet for a moment as he realized how much trouble he was in. Look, maybe we can work something out. I could make sure all your HOA fines disappear. We could forget this whole thing happened. Too late for that, Sarah said. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to run a fraud scheme in my neighborhood. Within 20 minutes, Sarah's FBI colleagues arrived along with local police and paramedics. Agent Rodriguez, Sarah's usual partner, got out of the lead car with a big smile on his face. Let me guess, Rodriguez said. You were supposed to be taking a quiet break from work, and instead you uncovered a major fraud operation. Something like that, Sarah replied. These idiots thought they could intimidate an FBI agent into giving up her house. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As the suspects were loaded into police cars, Sarah felt satisfied that justice was being served, but she also knew this was just the beginning. She still needed to build a complete case against the entire Webb family operation and make sure all their victims got their money back. The fake arrest had been Marcus Webb's biggest mistake. Instead of scaring Sarah into submission, it had given her all the evidence she needed to destroy his criminal enterprise completely. Sarah spent the next 2 days using her FBI resources to investigate Pinnacle Properties and everyone connected to it. What she discovered made her both angry and excited. She was looking at a sophisticated fraud scheme that had been operating for at least 3 years. The background check on James Miller showed his real name was James Webb, Marcus Webb's younger brother. Marcus was the HOA president who had been sending Sarah all the violation notices. The 2 brothers were working together to steal people's homes. Sarah dug deeper into Pinnacle Properties. The company was registered to Linda Webb, who was Marcus Webb's wife. On paper, Linda appeared to be the owner of the business. But when Sarah traced the money, she found that Marcus was actually controlling everything. The scheme was clever and cruel. Marcus would use his position as HOA president to target specific homeowners with fake violations and increasing fines. When people became desperate from the constant harassment and mounting fees,
James would appear with an offer to buy their house for cash at a price well below market value. Sarah found records showing that Pinnacle Properties had bought 7 houses in Willow Creek over the past 2 years.
all of the sellers had been dealing with HOA problems before they sold. The company would then fix up the houses and sell them for much higher prices, sometimes making over $100,000 profit on each one. But the most shocking discovery was how they chose their targets. Sarah found emails between Marcus and Mrs. Henderson discussing which homeowners to go after next. They specifically looked for elderly people, single women, and families who seemed to have less money. They thought these people would be easier to intimidate and less likely to fight back. Sarah printed out all the evidence she had found and organized it into files just like she would for any FBI case. She had financial records, email communications, property records, and a clear pattern of criminal behavior. Marcus and James Webb were guilty of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. But Sarah wanted to understand the full scope of their operation before she made her move. She decided to visit some of the families who had sold their houses to Pinnacle Properties. The first family Sarah contacted was the Johnsons, who had sold their house 8 months ago. She found their new address and drove to visit them. They now lived in a small apartment across town. Mrs. Johnson answered the door when Sarah knocked. She was an elderly woman who looked tired and stressed. "Hi, Mrs. Johnson, my name is Sarah Martinez. I live in your old neighborhood on Willow Creek. I was hoping I could ask you some questions about your experience with the HOA there." Mrs. Johnson's face immediately showed fear and sadness. "Oh dear, are they giving you trouble too?" "Yes, they are. I was wondering if you could tell me what happened to you." Mrs. Johnson invited Sarah inside. Her husband was sitting in a chair watching TV. Their apartment was much smaller than their old house had been. "It started about a year before we sold," Mrs. Johnson explained. "First, they said our fence was 6 inches too tall. We had to pay to have it rebuilt. Then they said our roof shingles were the wrong color. We had to pay thousands of dollars to replace the roof." "How much did you end up paying in total?" Sarah asked. "Almost $15,000, Mr. Johnson said from his chair. Every month there was something new. They said our driveway was cracked and needed to be repaved. They said our mailbox was rusty. They even said our doorbell was too loud. We tried to fight some of the violations, Mrs. Johnson said. But every time we disputed something, they charged us more money and rejected our dispute anyway. We felt trapped. Then this man James showed up, Mr. Johnson said. He was very nice and said he could help us. He offered to buy our house for cash so we could get away from all the HOA problems. Did you want to sell? Sarah asked. No, Mrs. Johnson said, starting to cry. We lived in that house for 25 years. All our memories were there. But we couldn't afford to keep paying the fines. We were spending our entire retirement savings on HOA violations. How much did you sell the house for? $220,000, Mr. Johnson said sadly. But houses in that neighborhood are selling for over $300,000 now. We lost at least $80,000. Sarah felt sick hearing their story. The Johnsons had been robbed of their home and their savings by Marcus and James Webb, and they were not the only ones. Sarah visited 2 more families who had sold to Pinnacle Properties. Their stories were almost identical. All of them had been targeted with fake HOA violations until they felt they had no choice but to sell. All of them had lost tens of thousands of dollars on their homes. The 3rd family Sarah visited was the Garcias. But when she knocked on their door, a stranger answered. I'm looking for the Garcia family, Sarah said. They moved out about 6 months ago, the man said. I bought this house from a company called Pinnacle Properties. Sarah realized this was one of the houses that had been flipped and resold. She asked the man how much he had paid for it. $340,000, he said. It was completely renovated and looked perfect. Sarah knew the Garcias had probably sold it to Pinnacle for around $200,000. The Webb brothers had made over $100,000 profit on this house alone. That evening, Sarah calculated the total amount of money the Webb brothers had stolen. Based on the 7 houses she could prove they had bought and resold, they had made at least $600,000 in illegal profits, and there might be other houses in different neighborhoods that she had not discovered yet. Sarah also realized that her own harassment was escalating because she was not giving in to their pressure, like the other families had. Marcus Webb was probably getting frustrated that his usual tactics were not working on her. The next morning, Sarah received the most aggressive letter yet from the HOA. This time they claimed she was running an illegal business from her home because she received too many packages. The fine was $1,000 and the letter said if she did not pay within 7 days, they would begin legal proceedings to force her to sell her house. Sarah laughed when she read the letter. Marcus Webb had no idea that he was threatening to take legal action against an FBI agent who now had enough evidence to send him to federal prison. But the letter also made Sarah realize that the Webb brothers were getting desperate. They had probably expected her to crack by now and accept James's offer to buy her house. Instead, she had been gathering evidence against them. Sarah decided it was time to let them know they had made a serious mistake. She was going to give them one chance to stop their criminal activity voluntarily. If they refused, she would bring the full power of the FBI down on them. Sarah picked up her phone and called the HOA office. When Janet answered, Sarah said, "This is Sarah Martinez. I need to speak with Marcus Webb immediately. He's not available right now. Can I take a message? Tell him that Sarah Martinez knows exactly what he and his brother James are doing with Pinnacle Properties. Tell him I have evidence of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. And tell him that if he wants to avoid federal charges, he needs to call me back within 24 hours. Sarah hung up the phone and smiled. She had just fired the first shot in what would soon become a very one-sided war. Marcus Webb was about to learn that he had picked the wrong person to mess with. The hunt was officially on. 3 weeks after the garbage can incident, Sarah received another letter from the HOA. This time they claimed she had been playing loud music that disturbed her neighbors. The fine was $300. Sarah stared at the letter in disbelief. She had been out of town for work when the noise complaint was supposedly made. She had flown to Chicago to meet with other FBI agents about the fake medicine case. Her house had been completely empty for 3 days. Sarah immediately called the HOA office. "This is Sarah Martinez. I got a noise complaint letter, but I wasn't even home when this supposedly happened." "Mrs. Henderson filed the complaint personally," Janet said. "She reported loud music coming from your house on Tuesday evening around 9 p.m. I was in Chicago on Tuesday. I can prove it with my airline tickets and hotel receipts." You'll need to submit that evidence in writing along with a formal dispute form. There's a $50 processing fee for disputes. Sarah could not believe they wanted her to pay money just to prove she was innocent. This is getting ridiculous. Your HOA is charging me for things I didn't do. All complaints are investigated thoroughly, Janet said in a bored voice. If you want to dispute it, fill out the forms. Sarah hung up, feeling angry and frustrated. But she also felt something else. The same feeling she got when she was tracking a criminal who was trying to stay one step ahead of her. Someone was playing games with her, and she did not like being played. That weekend, Sarah decided to do some real investigation. She put on casual clothes and took a long walk around the neighborhood. She wanted to see if other people were having similar problems with the HOA. She stopped to talk to Mr. Garcia, who was working in his front yard. "Nice garden," Sarah said. "I'm Sarah. I live on Maple Street." "Thanks, I'm Roberto." "I know your house, the white one with the red door." "Yes, that's me." "Can I ask you something?" "Have you had any trouble with the HOA lately?" Roberto's face changed. He looked around nervously before answering. "Why do you ask?" "I've been getting a lot of violation notices that don't seem fair. I was wondering if it's happening to other people too." Roberto was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside. I don't want to talk about this where people can hear us." Sarah followed Roberto into his house. His wife Maria was in the kitchen and joined their conversation. "The HOA has been making our lives miserable for 6 months, Maria said. "They started with small things like saying our house number was too small. Then they said our driveway had oil stains that needed to be cleaned. Every week there's something new." "How much have you paid in fines?" Sarah asked. "Almost $2,000, Roberto said sadly. "We can't afford to keep paying, but they say if we don't pay they can put a lien on our house." "Have you tried to fight the violations?" "We tried once," Maria said. "We paid the $50 to dispute a fine, but they rejected our dispute and kept the money. Now they charge us an extra $100 every time we complain about anything." Sarah felt sick hearing this. "Have you thought about selling your house?" Roberto and Maria looked at each other. "A man came to our door last month," Roberto said quietly. "He said he heard we were having HOA troubles and offered to buy our house for cash. The price was much lower than what our house is worth, but he said we could close in 2 weeks and all our HOA problems would go away." "Did you get his name?" Sarah asked. "James something." "He gave us a business card." Maria went to get the card from a drawer. "Here it is, James Miller from Pinnacle Properties." Sarah memorized the name and company. This was the first real clue she had found about what might be behind the HOA harassment. "Are you thinking about taking his offer?" Sarah asked. "We don't want to," Roberto said. "This is our home. We've lived here for 12 years, but we can't keep paying these fines forever." Sarah left Roberto and Maria's house feeling angry but also excited. She was starting to see a pattern that reminded her of fraud cases she had worked on before. Someone was using the HOA to pressure homeowners into selling their houses cheap, but she needed more evidence. Over the next few days, Sarah received 2 more violation notices. One claimed she had parked her car on the street overnight, which violated HOA rules. The other said her front lawn had weeds that needed to be removed immediately. Both violations carried fines of $250 each. Sarah took pictures of her car in her driveway and pictures of her lawn, which looked exactly like every other lawn on the street. She was building a file of evidence that the violations were fake. She also started keeping a detailed log of her activities. Every time she left her house, she wrote down where she went and when she came back. If the HOA tried to claim she was doing something wrong, she would have proof of where she actually was. The harassment continued to escalate. Sarah received a letter saying her mailbox was now painted the wrong color, even though she had not painted it at all. Another letter claimed she was hanging laundry outside to dry, which was not allowed. Sarah did not even own a clothesline. Each violation came with a bigger fine than the last one. The mailbox color complaint was $400. The laundry violation was $500. The letters also became more threatening, using words like legal action and forced compliance. Sarah's FBI instincts told her that whoever was behind this was getting impatient. The escalating fines and threatening language suggested they wanted her to give up and sell her house quickly. One evening, Sarah was working in her home office when her doorbell rang. She looked out the window and saw a man she did not recognize standing on her porch. He was middle-aged with gray hair and wore an expensive-looking suit. Sarah went to the door but did not open it. Can I help you? She called through the door. Hi there. I'm James Miller from Pinnacle Properties. I heard you might be having some difficulties with your HOA, and I wanted to see if I could help. This was the same man who had approached Roberto and Maria. Sarah opened the door but kept the chain lock attached. I'm not interested in selling my house. Oh, I understand completely, James said with a big smile. But I know dealing with HOA problems can be really stressful and expensive. I help people in situations like yours all the time. I can offer you a fair cash price for your home and you could be out of this mess in just 2 weeks. What makes you think I'm having HOA problems? Sarah asked. James's smile faltered for just a second. Well, word gets around in a small neighborhood like this. I just thought I could help. I'm not interested, Sarah said firmly. Let me leave you my card anyway, James said, in case you change your mind. These HOA situations have a way of getting worse before they get better. The way he said that last sentence sounded almost like a threat to Sarah. After James left, she looked at his business card carefully. Pinnacle Properties had an address across town, but no website or other contact information besides a phone number. Sarah was now convinced that the HOA harassment was connected to this real estate company, but she needed to understand exactly how the scheme worked and who else was involved. That night, Sarah used her FBI computer access to run background checks on James Miller, Pinnacle Properties, and Marcus Webb. What she found confirmed her suspicions and made her realize this was much bigger than just harassment. She was looking at an organized fraud operation that had probably been running for years. Sarah smiled as she reviewed the information on her screen. These people had no idea they had picked the wrong target. They thought they were dealing with a helpless homeowner who would eventually give in to their pressure. They had no idea they were actually dealing with one of the FBI's most successful fraud investigators. Sarah decided it was time to stop being the victim and start being the hunter. Sarah was drinking her morning coffee when she heard the doorbell ring. She looked at the clock on her kitchen wall. It was only 7:30 in the morning. Who would be visiting this early? She walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. A woman with gray hair and a stern face stood on her porch. The woman wore a dark blue suit and carried a clipboard. Sarah did not recognize her. Sarah opened the door but kept the chain lock attached. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Are you Sarah Martinez?" the woman said in a sharp voice. "Yes, that's me. I am Mrs. Henderson from the Homeowners Association. I need to speak with you about some violations of our community rules." Sarah was confused. She had been living in her house for over a year and had never heard from the HOA before. She unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. "What kind of violations?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Henderson looked at her clipboard. "Your mailbox is not positioned correctly according to HOA standards. It must be exactly 12 inches from the curb. Yours is 15 inches away." Sarah looked toward the street at her mailbox. It looked exactly the same as every other mailbox on the block. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. My mailbox looks the same as everyone else's. I measured it myself yesterday," Mrs. Henderson said coldly. "The rules are very clear. Your mailbox must be moved immediately or you will receive a fine." Sarah felt irritated but tried to stay calm. In her FBI work, she had dealt with much more difficult people than this. "Okay, I can move it. How much time do I have?" 3 days. If it's not fixed by then, the fine is $200. $200 for moving a mailbox 3 inches seemed crazy to Sarah, but she nodded. "I'll take care of it." Mrs. Henderson made a note on her clipboard. "There's another matter. Your garden gnome violates our aesthetic standards." Sarah looked at the small gnome sitting by her front steps. She had bought it because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden. "What's wrong with it?" "Garden decorations must be approved by the HOA board before they can be displayed. You never requested approval for this gnome." "I didn't know I needed approval for a garden gnome. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse," Mrs. Henderson said. "The gnome must be removed or you'll receive another $200 fine." Sarah was starting to get angry, but she kept her voice steady. "Is there a list of these rules somewhere? I don't remember getting one when I bought my house. All homeowners should have received a copy of the HOA guidelines when they moved in. If you lost yours, you can request a new copy for a $25 processing fee." Sarah could not believe what she was hearing. She had to pay money just to get a copy of rules she was supposed to follow, but she needed to see these rules to understand what other problems might come up. "Fine, I'll pay for a new copy. How do I get one?" Mrs. Henderson handed her a business card. "Call this number and speak to our office manager. Someone will mail you the guidelines within 5 business days." After Mrs. Henderson left, Sarah felt frustrated and confused. She had bought her house specifically because it was in a quiet neighborhood where people minded their own business. Now she was being hassled about mailbox positions and garden gnomes. Sarah called the HOA office number on the business card. A bored-sounding woman answered the phone. "Willow Creek HOA, this is Janet. Hi, this is Sarah Martinez on Maple Street. I need to order a copy of the HOA guidelines. That'll be $25. We only accept checks or money orders, no credit cards. When will I receive them? We mail them out once a week on Fridays. So probably next Friday if your payment gets here by Thursday." Sarah was amazed by how difficult they were making this simple request. "Can't you email them to me?" "No, we only send paper copies. That's our policy." Sarah hung up and shook her head. She wrote a check for $25 and put it in an envelope with her address request. Then she went outside to look at her mailbox more carefully. She got a measuring tape from her garage and checked the distance from the mailbox to the curb. It was exactly 13 inches, not 15 like Mrs. Henderson had said. Sarah measured 3 other mailboxes on her street. 2 were 11 inches from the curb and 1 was 16 inches away. This made Sarah suspicious. Why was Mrs. Henderson targeting her specifically when other mailboxes were not positioned correctly either? Sarah's FBI training had taught her to notice when something did not make sense. That afternoon, Sarah moved her mailbox to exactly 12 inches from the curb. She also put her garden gnome in the garage, even though she thought the whole thing was ridiculous. The next week, Sarah received her copy of the HOA guidelines in the mail. The booklet was 47 pages long and full of rules about everything imaginable. There were rules about what color you could paint your house, how tall your grass could be, what kind of cars you could park in your driveway, and dozens of other things. As Sarah read through the rules, she realized that almost every house in the neighborhood was probably violating something. The guidelines were so detailed and strict that it would be almost impossible to follow every single rule. 2 weeks after fixing her mailbox and removing her gnome, Sarah got another letter from the HOA. This time they were complaining about her garbage cans. According to the letter, she had put them out for pickup one day too early, which violated rule number 23 in section 4 of the guidelines. The fine for this violation was $150. Sarah checked the guidelines and found rule 23. It said garbage cans could only be put out after 6 p.m. on the night before pickup day. Sarah was sure she had put her cans out on the correct night, but she had no way to prove it. She called the HOA office to dispute the fine. "I put my garbage cans out at the right time," she told Janet. Mrs. Henderson reported seeing them out early. "Are you saying she's lying?" "I'm saying there might be a mistake. The fine stands. You have 30 days to pay." Sarah was getting more suspicious about what was happening. Mrs. Henderson seemed to be watching her house very closely and looking for any excuse to give her a fine. But why? Sarah had never done anything to bother the HOA or her neighbors. That evening, Sarah decided to use some of her FBI skills to investigate. She went online and researched Mrs. Henderson and the HOA board. What she found was interesting. Mrs. Henderson had been on the HOA board for 8 years. The current HOA president was a man named Marcus Webb, who had been in charge for 3 years. In the past 2 years, Sarah found records showing that several families in the neighborhood had sold their houses after receiving multiple HOA violations and fines. Sarah also noticed that many of the complaint letters she could find online had similar language and formatting. It was as if the same person was writing all of them using a template. This pattern reminded Sarah of cases she had worked on before. When people were being targeted systematically, there was usually a reason behind it. Someone was benefiting from the harassment, and Sarah was determined to find out who and why. As she sat in her home office looking at the information she had gathered, Sarah felt the familiar excitement of starting to solve a puzzle. She had thought she was just dealing with an annoying HOA, but her instincts told her there was something much bigger going on. Sarah decided she would not just pay the fines and hope the harassment stopped. She was going to investigate this like the FBI agent she was, and she was going to find out exactly what Mrs. Henderson and Marcus Webb were really up to. Sarah Martinez pulled into her driveway and turned off the car engine. She sat for a moment looking at her small house on Maple Street. The white paint on the walls was fresh. The grass was cut short and green. The mailbox stood straight by the road. Everything looked perfect and normal. This was exactly what Sarah wanted. After 15 years working for the FBI, she needed a place where nobody knew who she was. Her neighbors thought she worked from home doing marketing for companies. They had no idea that she was one of the most feared federal agents in the country. Sarah got out of her car and grabbed her grocery bags. Mrs. Chen from next door was watering her flowers. She waved and smiled. "Hi, Sarah. How was your day?" Mrs. Chen called out. "Good, thanks. Just picked up some food for dinner," Sarah replied. She kept her voice friendly but not too interested. She had learned to be polite but not close with neighbors. Sarah walked to her front door and used her key. Inside, her house was simple and clean. The living room had a couch, a coffee table, and a TV. The kitchen was small but had everything she needed. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms. One was where she slept. The other was her home office, though her neighbors would be shocked to see what was really in there. The office looked like any other workspace from the outside. But behind a hidden panel were her FBI badge, 3 different guns, surveillance equipment, and files from cases that had put some very dangerous people in prison. Sarah was known in criminal circles as the Hunter, because once she started tracking someone, she never gave up until they were caught. Sarah put away her groceries and made a simple dinner. As she ate, she looked out her kitchen window at the street. Kids rode their bikes on the sidewalk. Mr. Johnson was washing his car. Everything was quiet and peaceful. This neighborhood in Willow Creek was perfect for Sarah's needs. The houses were not too expensive but not too cheap. The people who lived here worked regular jobs and minded their own business. There was very little crime, which meant local police rarely came around. Sarah could live here without drawing attention to herself. She had bought the house 18 months ago after her last big case. That case had taken 3 years of her life. She had gone undercover to catch a group of men who were stealing millions of dollars from banks. The work was dangerous and stressful. She had to pretend to be someone else for months at a time. She could not trust anyone and had to always watch her back. When the case finally ended and all the criminals went to prison, Sarah was exhausted. Her boss at the FBI told her to take some time off. But Sarah knew she needed more than a vacation. She needed a place where she could be normal, at least when she was not working. So she found this house in Willow Creek and created her cover story. She told people she worked in marketing and did most of her work online. This explained why she was home during the day sometimes, but also why she traveled for work. It was the perfect lie because it was boring enough that nobody asked too many questions. Sarah finished her dinner and washed the dishes. Then she went upstairs to her real office. She had 3 computer screens set up on a large desk. One was connected to the internet like any normal computer. The other 2 were secure and connected directly to FBI systems. Tonight she needed to review files for a new case she would start working on next week. The new case was about a group of people who were selling fake medicines online. They were taking money from sick people and giving them pills that did not work. Some of the fake medicines were even making people sicker. The FBI had been watching this group for months and now it was time to shut them down. Sarah opened the files and started reading. The main suspect was a man named David Torres who lived in Miami. He had been running the fake medicine business for 2 years. The FBI thought he had made over $5 million by cheating sick people. As Sarah read the files, she felt the familiar feeling she always got when starting a new case. It was like hunting. She would study everything about David Torres until she knew him better than he knew himself. Then she would find his weaknesses and use them to catch him. Sarah worked for 2 hours before closing the files. Tomorrow she would call her partner, Agent Rodriguez, to discuss their plan. They would probably need to go undercover again, which meant Sarah would have to create a new fake identity and move to a different city for a few months. But tonight, she was just Sarah, the marketing consultant who lived in a quiet house on Maple Street. She went downstairs and made herself a cup of tea. Then she sat on her couch and turned on the TV to watch the news. The local news was talking about a new shopping center being built across town. The weather reporter said it would be sunny and warm tomorrow. There was a story about the high school football team winning their game. Normal, everyday news that had nothing to do with crime or danger. Sarah smiled as she sipped her tea. This was why she loved her house in Willow Creek. Here she could pretend that the world was safe and simple. She could pretend that her biggest worry was what to make for dinner or whether it would rain. Of course, Sarah knew this was not really true. Even in quiet neighborhoods like this one, bad things could happen. But for now, she was happy to pretend. After spending so many years chasing criminals and seeing the worst things people could do to each other, she needed this peace. As the news ended, Sarah turned off the TV and got ready for bed. She checked that all her doors and windows were locked, a habit from her years in law enforcement. She also checked that her gun was in the drawer next to her bed just in case. But as she lay down to sleep, Sarah felt safe and calm. Tomorrow she would go back to being FBI Agent Martinez, hunter of criminals. But tonight she was just Sarah, a quiet woman who lived in a quiet house on a quiet street where nothing bad ever happened. She had no idea that very soon, her two worlds would crash together in a way she never expected.